at the very end of my book, I list all the scriptures used by Manichaeans to support their doctrine. And guess which ones they are? They're the very ones that Calvinists use today. Is that a coincidence? No.
Okay. Now, I want to, everyone, if you've tuned out, tune back in. Because this kind of reasoning is so flawed that you need to understand why it is flawed. I've been looking for it, haven't found it yet, but I'm not going to say it's not there yet. But given that the Manichaeans had other scriptures, given that the Manichaeans rejected the prophets and Moses, given that the Manichaeans rejected a number of the Gospels, and hence had an extremely limited biblical canon, plus the revelations of Mani, plus other books from other religions. I'm wondering, I'm really looking forward to finding in here, I haven't found it yet, but I'm going to keep looking, the hermeneutical methodology that allows you to make a statement like what was just made there. Because what underlies that statement? Well, look at the verses they used. And they used them to support Manichaeism. Really, what verses do you think you could pull out of Paul to substantiate the idea that we are sparks of the realm of light trapped in dark bodies that were actually created by demons that made it and made Adam and Eve? Where exactly do you think you get that from Paul? In fact, how do you interpret Paul without the prophets? How do you do that? He's constantly quoting from the Old Testament. He's constantly quoting from the Psalter, from Moses, from the prophets. And if you've rejected those as revelations of an evil God, then could you please tell me how any person who is trying to deal honestly with the historical context of these writings could come up with the idea that, well, hey, the Manichaeans use these verses and the Calvinists use these verses, so must be the same thing. They used the same exegetical methodology. They used a grammatical, historical perspective, pan-canonical. They took the entire canon of Scripture. No, they rejected the vast majority of the canon of Scripture. They limited it to just Tota Scriptura, just the Christian canon. No, they didn't. In fact, they had a completely different canon of Scripture. They believed that Scriptures were inspired. No, actually, they didn't. Mani's stuff was, but the Christian Scriptures had obviously been manipulated and changed, and you got to pick and choose what you want, even in Paul, because Paul says things about the Jews and things like that, and about the Creator God, and we know that the Creator God's evil, so that can't be. So why have a list like that? What is that supposed to communicate? It sounds good to someone who has zero understanding of logic or history. If that's what you're trying to do is impress that kind of person, okay. But to anyone who does any meaningful study of interreligious studies, interfaith encounters, any type of missionary work, apologetics, studies, any church history, you're just left going, did you just say that in public? Did you just say to everybody that if you use the same verses? I was reminded the first time I heard this while I was running and listening to this, I was reminded of the argument that was used 21 years ago when I had one of my few opportunities to engage a well-known leading figure in the Oneness Pentecostal movement, Dr. Sabin. You may call that in 1999. I was only 2 years away at that point from finally just giving up. So I still had stuff up here, but it was pathetic. Anyway, we did a debate on the Trinity. And if you've watched that debate or listened to that debate, you are aware of the fact that one of the arguments that Dr. Sabin used was that the verses that James White has used to prove the Trinity are the verses Roman Catholicism uses to prove the Trinity. We know that Roman Catholicism is the whore of Babylon. Roman Catholicism murdered all these people. But this man's using the same verses. Now, why do you think he was doing that? Well, I would argue it's because he did not have a meaningful exegetical response to what I presented, and he didn't. And what the later Roman Catholic Church did is irrelevant to the truth content of the prologue of John chapter 17, specifically verse 5, and to the Carmen Christi in Philippians chapter 2, all three of which present Jesus as a divine person in communion with the Father prior to his incarnation, which is a refutation of the oneness denial of the Trinity. Why was he doing that? And who would be impacted by that kind of argumentation? It is a false form of argumentation. It's irrelevant to the substance of the argument. But what you're saying is somebody else makes an argument like that and they're bad. So he's bad. So ignore the argument. There's a whole appendix. Well, excuse me, but if you're going to be having discussions about the stuff that's in Romans 8, 9, and 10, what other verses are you going to go to? I don't understand. How is that even relevant? It's the same ones. Same interpretation? No, it's totally different form of, it has to be a completely different form of determinism. It can't be the same form because there's no God in Manichaeism that could be the foundation of the decree that includes the creation of the world. Remember, for the Manichaees, demons mated and made Adam and Eve. Didn't make it up. But how can you, for a second, suggest that, well, they just used the same verses and meant something completely different by it? So I guess it would be a valid argument for me to point out that for your provisionism, I can go to the LDS website and the Ensign magazine and show you Joseph Smith and the Mormons using your verses. And they actually use it the same way you do. Right? So that means you all are actually crypto-Mormons. Ready to, if Leighton starts wearing a name badge and calls himself Elder Flowers, I can just see that coming up on, yeah, and he needs to have the temple garment on underneath too. Or it's just fake at that point. The problem is I could then give you the sure sign of the nail, but you don't know what the sure sign of the nail is. So there you go. No, we don't want to. No, well, yeah, okay. There are. It's a handshake. Yeah, it's one of the signs in the temple. It's one of the signs. I think it's the Melchizedek priesthood. Anyway, that's why they closed the temples. Is you can't have the 5 points of fellowship during the coronavirus. No, not happening. We're skipping out on that one. Yeah, big time. Wow. How did we get here? I don't know how we got here. I've lost the point where I was. The point is, obviously, this is fallacious argumentation to the extreme. And I would invite you provisionists who recognize, well, okay, yeah, Yeah, you could find Mormons using the same verses we use to sort of make the same point. It doesn't invalidate the point just because the Mormons are arguing it. They don't even believe in one true God. Exactly. Which one of you provisionists is going to come out and say, you know what? I'm not sure about all the rest of this stuff, but yeah, that's a bad argument. Because it is. It's just a bad argument. It's indefensible. And if you'll defend it, then you'll defend anything this man says. It doesn't matter. You don't care. There's no standard here. There's no standard here. So, yeah. All right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 13 minutes. Okay.
And every person who is a determinist quotes Augustine, right? They all get it from Augustine.
Okay. So we have no definition of determinism. We do not have a distinction between mechanical determinism, logical determinism, psychological determinism, physical determinism, theological determinism. We have no distinctions, no recognition. And I'm not going to say this based upon extensive reading of Augustine, but I'm quite certain that the clarity of formulation in regards to the divine decree in Calvin is greater than that in Augustine. And then I think that even gets greater in the next century, so that you have tremendous clarity within Turton. And by the time you get to that point, anybody who can confuse the dualistic, naturalistic, non-decretal, no monotheistic God determinism of Manichaeism without a Reformed theology is just not functioning with the full deck. That's just dishonest. It's just dishonest in its extreme. That's just as clear as you could possibly make it. And so, and all through this, I'm just sitting back going, so not one of us has ever read a verse of the Bible, huh? It's just all that stuff, not just in Ephesians and Romans, but man, I mean, Isaiah 40 through 48, the certainty of the coming of Cyrus. How do you make that work? I mean, Cyrus was the result of literally hundreds of thousands of free choices of creatures. How did God know without a decree? Centuries before the soldiers decided, hey, let's not rip that seamless garment he's got. Let's get some money. Let's cast lots for it. Hundreds of years. Millions of free will choices. God's a pretty good guesser, huh? Yeah, well, there you go.
And Dr. Wilson, you correct me if this is not correct, but it seems to me that what compatibilists are saying is that men are free as long as they do what they want, but what they want is determined by their nature, which is determined from birth by God's decree.
Yeah.
And that's what Augustine, in your estimation, taught. In other words, they're born with this fallen nature. That's what you have the babies, corrupted.
Okay, now let's make sure we see what the connection here is. In Manichaeism, you are born with a corrupted nature because you're born. Period. There's no federal headship. Adam is the first man who is the offspring of demons. But your connectedness to Adam is that you have a spark of light contained in you that is not natural to this realm and needs to go back to the light realm. That's not federal headship. That's not covenant theology. That's not based upon a monotheistic worldview. You don't have a creator. How do you make these parallels? Why do you ignore these fundamental contextual facts that change everything? How? How is this done? I am stunned when I listen to this stuff. How can you ignore this stuff? Are you really going to sit there and say it doesn't matter? Doesn't matter. Nope. We're using the same terminology, but no.
Yeah.
And that's what Augustine, in your estimation, taught. In other words, they're born with this fallen nature. That's what you have the babies, corrupted with this guilt. And they are going to be God haters from birth because that's their nature, unless God steps in and changes their nature to make them want God.
Yes.
Is that oversimplifying it?
No, I think that's exactly right. That's a very easy, simple way to explain it. That's true. Exactly.
So when Gottschalk in 800 taught it, though, because he wasn't the famous, Augustine, the fighter, he was deemed a heretic.
I'm not sure how much about Gottschalk Leighton Flowers actually knows. Leighton, honestly, without Googling, do you know who Robertus and Retrandus were? If you don't, stop talking about Gottschalk, because you don't know what you're talking about. You're just...
Yeah. And so when you appeal to history as an authority, then it's really depending on which council you want to appeal to. You appeal to the Council of Orange or the Council of Dort or the Council of Nicaea or this council, that council, which is one of the reasons that we do want to appeal, obviously, to Scripture as our first and foremost authority.
You guys get to do that? We don't? So you didn't challenge him when he said that every determinist just gets it from Augustine. But now we want to appeal to you want to get to appeal to Scripture? Like we don't? You and I should debate Romans. Oh, never mind. We already did.
Because no matter what view you hold to, you can find some council somewhere that probably supported whatever weird view you want to support.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're both chuckling, but that's exactly what this is all about. You decide you're going to come up with a way of cramming Southern Baptist traditionalism into the early church. And so, yeah, you can find a quote here, a quote there, interpret it in your context, and boom, 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 you got it. Yep. Especially the early church is liable to a tremendous amount of that kind of let's cram our thinking into these guys. Yeah, you're right, Leighton. That's exactly what y'all are up to.
The early church fathers prior to Augustine were confused about this issue and didn't know what they were talking about, and obviously didn't get it right. So Augustine was kind of the first, I think it's Lorraine Bottner or Bettner, however you pronounce that, who's also a Calvinistic historian who admits that Augustine is the first to introduce these things.
Lorraine Bottner. Okay. Yeah, it's Bettner. At least Dr. Wilson knew that. I think that's what he was saying in the background. But again, this is a super simplified, simplistic way of approaching it. What has been said was the early centuries up to this point in time were focused upon what? Doctrine of God and Christology. Doctrine of God and Christology. What were the councils about? What was Nicaea about? What was Ephesus about? Why was there the Arian resurgence? Why do you have Athanasius kicked out of his... Why was Athanasius kicked out of his church 5 times while the Roman soldiers were running in the front door and he's running out the back? Did it have to do with soteriology? No, it didn't. It had to do with the doctrine of God, the doctrine of Christ, the doctrine of the Trinity. What about Chalcedon? What about Ephesus? Why were the monks beating the snot out of each other at Ephesus? It wasn't about this. So there was a shift at this point in time to a new discussion. And you can pretend that, well, when they were arguing with the pagans, they said this, and therefore I'm going to assume that meant this. You can do that if you want, but again, you're just not accurately representing what was going on in